Today, we are going to talk about our CYBERTECH nano robots. And the CYBERTECH nano robots, they are not really new in themselves, but we have released an updated version of them, and that's why they are called Nano 2. So they, one of my colleagues calls it a facelift, really, but it's a little bit more than a facelift. There are some changes below the hood, so to speak, that improves the functionality of the robots quite a lot. So when we developed these new robots, we had some focuses. We looked at the workspace of the robot, the operating space of the robot. We have changed how you can mount the robots. We have further improved or reduced the maintenance need of the robot. We have added software functions in form of special motion modes. It is now a fully digitized robot. That means that it can actually share all its robot data directly out to your network. We have significantly lowered the operating cost of the robots and also simplified the configuration of the setup of the robot, for example. We will go a little bit into these points as we go along here today. So one of the first improvements with the CYBERTECH nano is the fact that it is now possible to mount it in any position, not only on the floor or on the wall or in the roof. It could be an inclined position. That means basically you can mount it at any angle you want, all with the same robot type. It's just a software setting. You mount it and you tell it at what position it is mounted, and it will compensate its movement and its lubrication for that position automatically. There is also a new power system on board. That means for the external cabling up to the tool, with a completely new K-box with much more options than we had before in terms of what type of cabling you need into your tool. And those are deliverable directly from us and included in the warranty of the robot, of course. So that is also a big improvement. Now, if we look at the CYBERTECH nano, there are 3 models. And for those of you who know the KUKA robot range, you know that KR, that stands for KUKA robot. And then if we take the first one here in, for example, 10, that means that the payload of the robot is 10 kilos. And then we have a reach of 1440 millimeters. And the Dash 2 is, of course, that is the second generation of the CYBERTECH robots. And in the basic range of the CYBERTECH nano robots, there are 3 robots available. There are the 10 kilos, the 8 kilos with the 1600 millimeter range, and finally the 6 kilos with even a longer range, a 1840 millimeter range. The protection class of these robots are quite good. They are a complete waterproof as a standard. The access near the tools are IP67, which means that you can wash it off with high pressure water. The complete robot is IP65, which means that it's dust and waterproof. And the operating temperature that it's allowed to place this robot in has been widened quite a lot. So it goes all the way from 0 degrees, that means that it can work in a cooled room, and up to 55 degrees plus, which is quite a big range in terms of temperature here. Now, if we look at all these changes a little bit more in detail, we can see that the changes consists of a reduced contour around the axis 2 and 3. That means that it's a bit slimmer than before. It can get into a bit more tighter spaces. Optimized robot design is a very generic statement, but what it actually means is that we have been able to construct this robot out of fewer parts, meaning that there are fewer spare parts needed and required for this. The Axis 1 gearbox has been updated. There are already from the start forklift pockets for when you move the robot into position. We have again slimmed the footprint of the robot, so it takes as small space as possible. The inline wrist solution up near the working flange is optimized for this K-pipe energy system for the cabling out to the tool you might have. And we use the same K-pipe solution as for all our robots here. And there is actually spaces and possibility to place additional loads on both axis 1, 2, and 3. If you have your control valves, for example, there. It's possible to mount additional mechanical stops on axis 1 to 3, not only on axis 1. And all the motors and gearboxes has been exchanged in the robot. And finally, and I've already mentioned this, it's possible to mount the robot in any position you like. Now, if we look a bit more specifically at this, what does that mean? Well, I mentioned we have already changed all the motors and gearboxes. That actually gives us a bit increased axis speed on all axes and increased acceleration and retardation. That means that the robot is now even more dynamic and we can reduce our cycle times using this. This is all emphasized or even more visible because the weight of the total robot has gone down. That means also that we get a better path and point accuracy in the robot compared to before. And the new drives and gearboxes also allows us to optimize the energy consumption of the robot. That means that we can bring down the cost of operation in terms of energy. And finally, as I mentioned, it is a lot slimmer than before. And the best way of seeing this is actually having a look at the working space of the robot. You see, it's a very small area which it can't reach very close to itself. It can even reach under itself, which means that there is no need for a special console version of this robot. It can actually reach spaces under its own foot if it's sitting on a console. I also mentioned a little bit about in the older days, we had special variants of our robots. One could be a path-accurate robot and one can be a high-speed robot. This has been taken away and is now totally controlled to the software instead, where you can choose your mode of the robot. So in the basic variant, it's called the performance mode, which is the standard mode. But you can then software-wise switch it to a path mode, which makes the robot travel a little bit more path accurate than it would do in its normal mode. That would be typically practical when you're doing some a path that requires high precision, for example, a gluing or a welding path, for example. And on the other end of the scale, there is a dynamic mode, which actually is a high-speed mode. when you typically want to reduce your cycle time. There's a bottleneck in the robot movement, for example. And to emphasize this, I've brought into the webinar a small movie, which I will now show you. This movie might pop up in a separate window at your site. So if you don't see the video immediately, check if there's a separate window with the video popping up.
KUKA is setting the standard for the low payload category. Extremely compact, utmost precision, fascinatingly fast. For maximum performance, the new KR CYBERTECH nano series. 9 perfectly coordinated robot types with maximum efficiency. Ideal power density for infinite possibilities. Flexibility in any position. On the floor, wall, or ceiling. Simply anywhere. For fast availability in changing markets with an impressive reach. Maximum precision and productivity in narrow spaces, whether for handling, assembly, or continuous path motion. We think in solutions so that you can optimize your processes. Lower costs and more profits through unrivaled reliability. 20,000 maintenance-free hours. KUKA solutions, developed and built for your success. The new KR CYBERTECH nano series. Performance reinvented. Welcome to the new generation of robots.
So that small video basically explained a little bit about what we've been talking about so far. Now, I just said that there are 3 new robots, but that's not completely true. In fact, there are 6 different robot models. There is also 3 versions which are called ARC. And there are, as you see on the screen right now, 3 versions out of this, which is the KR8 for 8 kilo, 14 with a 1440 reach. There is an 8 kilo with a 1640 reach, and finally there is a 6 kilos with an 1840 reach robot. And all these 3 robots are called ARC at the end of it. And what is so special about them then? Well, they are equipped with a hollow wrist instead of the inline wrist, which you are used to in normal robots. This is another design of the axis 5 and 6 of the robot. That means that a tool can actually go inside the fitting of axis 6. So you can place, for example, as we have done in the picture to your right here, a welding gun directly inside it and get a more accurate, less space demanding installation. And of course, we still have a full 360-degree movement of the axis 6. So this is specially developed for example, for a welding gun, but it could also be a gluing application and so on, because you now get the welding gun integrated into axis 6. The cabling goes inside of the axis 4 to the energy pack. So this is a much neater installation, which is of course important where you have tight spaces. And speaking of welding applications, of course, there are a lot of software support for your welding applications. And in fact, there is quite a lot of software options which are available to the welding applications, with a basic one starting at what's called KUKA Arctic Basic. But there's then an Arctic Advanced, And on top of these options, there are some arc sense, which offers the possibility, for example, to track a seam with an arc sensor. There is a special option called Architect Multi-Layer, where you have the possibility of applying several layers of welding seams. And there are some options for seam tech finding or seam tech tracking. And there is also options for track TCP. That means that when you've cleaned your torch your torch tip, you need to read in where the new TCP of the torch thread is very accurately to be able to start your welding at the correct position. And one really interesting option to welding applications, I would say, is also our option for ready to pilot. And we are planning to have a separate webinar on the topic of welding, together with where we go through this welding technologies that we offer. It will come at a later date, and together with this option, ready to pilot. And actually, the easiest way to explain to you what this is again to show you a small movie. So again, this movie might pop up in a separate window. So if you can't see it immediately, please have a look at if the movie is starting in a separate window on your computer.
Orange Intelligenz.
So our option ready to pilot is typically an option which is usable by our end users. So with this option, you can actually, instead of programming the robot in a normal way, hand guide the robot by applying the 6D mouse directly on the robot, and then by hand moving the robot in the pattern and in the path you require. That means that this is an option extremely useful for an end user who is not typically a robot programmer, but wants to apply a new welding path, for example. It doesn't have to be used together with only welding, but without the knowledge of how to program the robot. But moving back to our new CYBERTECH nano robots. Well, what we have done is actually to lower the complete energy consumption of the robot during its lifetime. And this has been done by improving the drive and the controllers to the drives. By lowering the weight, we need less energy as well. We have also made fewer spare parts of the robot. That means that each part is more easily exchanged if there is such a need. And we've made it able to mount the robot in any position available. But not only those, but we have also optimized your cost of ownership by increasing the availability of the robot. Actually, the mean time between failure on these robots is 400,000 hours. That means that the technical availability of the robot itself is actually 99.999% of the operating time. And to emphasize this further, we expect that these robots will have quite a long lifetime out at our customers, and we have to act accordingly. That means that the spare parts for these robots are available for 25 years. But also the more regular costs have been lowered. That means that the need for oil change of these robots is every 20,000 hours, which means that actually that's almost 5 years of continuous production. The cable sets inside it are totally maintenance free and electronically shielded. That means that during the robot's lifetime will never be a need to exchange the internal cabling in it. And on the hollow wrist robots, that is the arc welding robots we looked at just now, the axis 5 and 6 are totally maintenance free. So this is also a huge improvement for you as the owner of the robots. Now, the robot comes with, of course, a smart pad, as with anyone, but also our new robot controller, which is called KR C5. And we will get back to this in a couple of weeks about what's new with our new controller generation. We have earlier talked about our controller generation, the C5 Micro, but we will get back in a couple of weeks and talk about the new larger C5 cabinets. And of course, since we are now on the new generation of controllers, we have also included the new system software 8.7 in those cabinets. And there is a webinar, What's New with the 8.7 available as well. Which pretty much brings me to an end of my webinar today.
Industrial intelligence.